Greetings, everybody, and welcome once more to the Dracovin Empire. Are you ready to dive back into Magic the Gathering? Yes, we're going and continuing our historical look at Magic the Gathering, going by set, release by release, talking about cards, what was going on, mechanics that came about, so that you get a good idea about, you want to play some of these things, and what was happening in Magic during these time periods. Today, we'll be visiting Mirrodin Besieged, the second in the Mirrodin Scars of Mirrodin Block. So if you're ready, your host and guide here can take your hand, open up the gate through the blind eternities, and take us, planeswalk us, over to Mirrodin once again to visit Mirrodin Besieged. So, remember, of course, tip your host and guide here, Dracovin, myself, liking, subscribing, the bell, and let me know your experience of Mirrodin Besieged in the comments below. Let's travel to the blind eternities once more! Right. So, Mirrodin Besieged. Of course, it is the second set in the Scars of Mirrodin Block. This is actually the 54th expansion of Magic the Gathering. Hey, we're getting up there. And this was released officially on February 4th, 2011. It reached just a little bit over 14 years ago that was released. Quite a ways. Its symbol here was an overlapping of the Mirrodin and Phyrexian symbols. So it's both of them combined at the same time. We'll talk about this entirely. Mark Gottlieb was the lead designer, Eric Lauer was the lead developer, and Jeremy Jarvis was the art director. Of course, we're still in Mirrodin, hey, and we've got Infect, Proliferate, Imprint, Metalcraft, Battlecry, Living Weapon, Metalcraft, we've got so many keyword abilities. Billion of them. We haven't gotten rid of our keyword abilities here. There was 155 cards here, which, interestingly enough, had 10 basic lands, talk about in a second here, 60 commons, 40 uncommons, 35 rares, and 10 mythic lands. Middle set of the Scars of Mirrodin Block, and, codename. Let's talk about those lands for a second, because I guess that's a thing we really want to discuss. So this was an interesting thing that there were 10 basic lands, which, at this point in time, when we have one large set, and traditionally 2 smaller sets. Again, this isn't always the case for the way that blocks were. Sometimes we have big, small, big rarity, but, normally it was big, small, small. And those middle sets and the smaller sets usually didn't have basic lands. In this case, this was for flavor. Basically, it asked the same artist who creates the 4 land panoramas for Scars of Mirrodin to basically have 2 additional art pieces for the panorama showing Phyrexia's influence on the plane. This is the Phyrexian spread on islands. It did this for all of them. Very interesting. So, very important, we did have more than just the set symbol on cards. We had watermarks. Mirrodin and Phyrexian watermarks. The expansion symbol, as I said, was an overlap of these two. Hey, but nearly every card in the set had symbol allegiance on its text box. And there were several cards that are Phyrexian versions of previous cards. So there was a card that would be in the previous. There's a version of it that's Phyrexian now. We'll talk about this a little bit more. But yes, this is something that started out with the watermarks in the last set, and we're continuing it now with additional Phyrexian stuff, and spreading a lot more. Artifacts were, of course, incredibly important to this set. And here's a Mirror Sire, who when it's put in the graveyard, gets a 1/1 color Mirror token. So it dies, you get another Mirror. 2 Mirror for the price of 2. So yeah, this was continuing the story of the Mirrans dealing with the Phyrexians showing up and battling between them. Their invasion, laying waste to their countryside, their people. The story started in Scars. There are 2 camps. And again, it's an artifact set. Just keep that in mind. And those 2 camps are best reflected on the pre-release, which we'll talk about again. But just to know, in the pre-release parties, there were special types of boosters that contained only cards from one faction or the other. And you had to choose them for building your deck. The intro packs were also separated out in factions. Yes. So, this was kind of neat here, that we had these different sections for the pre-release. I can safely say I did do the pre-release, and I did Phyrexian. I made a Phyrexian Infect deck in Scars. I did that pre-release. When I did this one, I just continued that. So, a big part of this entire thing is, when I talked about the previous set, the distribution was still more mirror into Phyrexian. Now, it's even. And there are also cards that weren't in the original Scars set. It was just blue, black, and green. They're now red and white cards that are Phyrexian. And now it's 72 each. This one here, Choking Fumes, that deals puts a -1/-1 counter on each attacking creature. I used this in some of my decks that I made that were block decks. So another big thing that happened here was the change in draft. So basically what's going on is the Besiege slowed down the limited format. Basically, it made changes to the draft, too. Previously, when you started a draft, before now, you would start by opening the card packs from the first set in the block. So you would start with, if you were doing it traditionally, Mirrodin Besieged, or Scars of Mirrodin, and then Mirrodin Besieged for the packs you received. In this case, for a draft, now, they started with the Mirrodin Besieged pack first, and then did the Scars of Mirrodin. So it didn't change the number of draft packs you got. It was still one Mirrodin Besieged booster with 2 Scars of Mirrodin booster. It's just, before, in previous ones, if you went by the old way, you'd open the 2 Scars first, and then your Mirrodin Besieged. Now you open your Mirrodin Besieged, and then you do your Scars for the draft. So it kind of switched the dynamic and did a little bit more focus on the new set, which is very interesting. The change in draft there. Changing the way that the format was working. Let's talk about the story a little bit. Of course, the main place the story goes is the book here. The Quest for Karn. It's the big one. It tells the entire block's story. And this is the Phyrexian assault on Mirrodin intensifying. The Resistance is trying to survive and overcome it. And basically both sides are bringing their full attack to bear. And Karn has basically retreated to Mirrodin's core and worshipped as new father of machines. So Karn's trapped his mind, battling himself, and basically trying to prevent himself from filling up the role the Phyrexians are trying to force upon him. There is more than just the book that tells the story, though. We also did get some webcomics. The big one here is Scarred, which is a webcomic about Elspeth, Koth, and Venser being all there. The 3 planeswalkers that were aligned with the Mirrodins. There are other beings in there, and Scarred is in 3 parts. There's also War and Phyrexian Strong and Scattered, which are also storylines that were told. This one was released from basically before the set came out. So all 5 of these storylines in the webcomic came out before the set officially released. It started in January 1st of 2006. Then it was the 13th, 17th for Scarred. War was on the 17th. And Phyrexian the Strong and Scattered was on the 26th. So these were webcomics that also helped tell the story. Other than that, we didn't get the book, which told the story, until April, after everything was out. So, yeah. I mean, that's the kind of way it was. They released it in that order. But yes, it was basically April right before the new Phyrexian came out. It was the full storyline. Alright. Marketing. How is this sold? Well, of course, you had your 16-card booster packs. I showed some booster packs earlier, so here's a booster box. But there was also some 6-card boosters. Here's one of them. 4 intro packs. Boom, we'll talk about them more. And, of course, the Fat Pack. The Fat Pack did change a little bit here. Basically, it removed the brief introduction on the expansion's respective novel. It increased the boosters from 8 to 9. The land pack had 80 cards, 40 from Scars, 40 from Mirrodin Besieged. There are 2 deck boxes in here. The 16-card boosters, as we showed, had Mirrodin Crusader, Phyrexian Crusader, and Tezzeret on the top, and the 6-card booster had Galissa on it. There was also another product line that came out during this time, the Event Decks. It's kind of a new theme deck. It wasn't an intro deck. These were 60-card decks with a 15-card sideboard that would have 7 rares and no mythic rares. Basically, these 2 event decks were a mono-red deck from the Mirrodin side and a blue-black deck from the Phyrexian side. They were released 3 years after the release of the pre-release. When I talk about the intro packs, I will talk about these two a little bit more and what was in them. But yes, basically, these were 2 other types of decks. So if you didn't want to get an intro pack and wanted something a little different, you get one of these. It's just it wasn't just cards from the setting. Now, when we had the pre-release, it was on January 29th to 30th of 2011, with a full launch party from the 4th to 7th of 2011, and a Magic Online release of February 21st. So January for the pre-release, February for the second, and a game day held on March 5th to 6th, 2011. With the pick a side gimmick that was going on during the pre-release, and the pre-release packs that I showed off, you had 2 different pre-release cards. Yeah. So I think that was a big thing we kind of have to reflect upon here with the entire thing. There were 2 pre-release cards here. In this case here, Hero of Bladehold and Glissa the Traitor. So, yes. Anyway. Basically, it was cards. If you wanted to get Glissa, you get all cards with Phyrexian watermark. And if you wanted Hero of Brighthold, all one with a Mirrodin. There was 1 basic land in each of these special boosters, and foils showed up as normal as most other boosters. So, yes. Glissa here is a first strike death touch that whenever a creature an opponent controls put in the graveyard from the battlefield, you may return that target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Basically, if opponent creatures die, you get artifacts back. You get artifacts. And here at Brighthold had the new mechanic Battle Cry, which we'll talk about a little bit more, but when it attacks, it creates soldiers that are tapped to attack. Battle Cry combines on each other, so basically it helps us get bigger. There was a preview before these cards came out. We'll talk about the preview cards here. These 4 were previewed during game day and given away as prizes. They were previewed at World 2010. Well, actually, no. The Peace Strider and Pierce Strider were basically previewed at game day and given away as prizes, and the Mirrodin Crusader and Phyrexian Crusader were previewed at Worlds 2010. Sorry, English there. We'll talk about these a little bit more when we talk about some of these things, but yeah, we will revisit these 2. And, some other ones is, of course, the release card, Thopter Assembly, which is gives you the ability to create Thopters if you don't have any. Basically, if you control no Thopters other than it, return it, and create 5 Thopter creatures. So, yeah, you play it, get it back to your hand, you replay it, once you have 5 things there. There were some promotional cards for things like Game Day. The Game Day cards were, of course, Treasure Mage, which we'll talk about Treasure Mage a little bit more. But it enters the battlefield, you choose your library for an artifact card with a converted mana cost of 6 or greater, put it in your hand, and shuffle your library. You get a big card. And if you won while at Game Day a little bit, there was also a full art Black Sun Zenith, which was a X card that put X -1/-1 counters on each creature. You nuked everything. The buy a box card was Mirrodin Crusader. Hey, we mentioned him before. Double strike, protection from black and green. We'll revisit him in his Phyrexian Crusader counterpart a little bit before the end here. Tips and tricks cards. Because there was a 16 card, a bonus. That was either tips or tricks or token. The tips and tricks, there were, of course, 5 of. The token, there were also 5. For the tips and tricks, they were Battle Cry, Metalcraft/Imprint, Living Weapon, Infect, which I'm showing off here, and Proliferate. On the pack of both the tips and tricks and the tokens were advertisements, 14 possible different ones. The tokens here, which I'm showing off, the Germ token, a 0/0 token that is connected to Living Weapon. There's also a Zombie token, a Golem token, a Horror token, and the Thopter token. Everything that could make a token was there. So, when it came to what was going on here, basically, there were plenty of cards that showed off stuff. Their pairs, like I was showing off, we'll talk about those a little bit more. But in this case, we're showing off Mirrodin cards. They're not corrupted Phyrexian. There were a lot others than just these 2, but I'm showing off Ink Moth Nexus, Mimics, Blink Moth Nexus. There was Viridian Corruptor, the Viridian Shaman, Blatesteel Colossus, the Darksteel Colossus. I'll kind of go over some of these more the corrupted version of cards, but basically we went from the Blink Moth Nexus here, which, could become a creature, flying, or tapping its +1/+1, to the Ink Moth, which doesn't have the tap anymore, but creates a 1/1 flying Thopter with Infect. The corruption is spreading. The cards are spreading the corruption. Mechanic-wise, we had a return of Metalcraft from the previous ability. Concussive Bolt here, of course, dealing 4 damage to target player, and creatures that player controls can't block if you have Metalcraft. Knowledge Pool for Imprint. Hey, we got a couple Imprint cards here. Yes, we're continuing again. These are the things returning from the previous set. I'm kind of going over them. When it enters the battlefield, each player exiles the top 3 cards in his or her library, and whenever a player casts a spell from his or her hand, that player exiles it. If the player does, he may actually cast a non-land card exiled with Knowledge Pool without paying its mana cost. So basically, you cycle cards in and out of Knowledge Pool. Interesting there, too. Proliferate continued here. This one, destroy creature and proliferate with Spread the Sickness. And of course, Infect makes its return. This one is a enchant creature to steal it and give it Infect. So hey. But there were also some new keywords. Yes, we didn't just stick with the 4 from before, we added some new ones. Of course, Battle Cry, which I mentioned. Here's a Quarter Paladin. There were a lot of jokes that I really loved, that if you had 4 Quarter Paladins, you got a full Paladin. A quarter Paladin? Yeah. Get 4 of them, you have a full Paladin. Anyway, Battlecry basically gives other creatures, attacking creatures, +1/+0 until end of turn. So, every other creature gets that bonus. If you attack with a bunch of Battlecry creatures, they get big. Phyrexian's also had a new mechanic, other than the Mirrons, with Living Weapon. I mentioned it with the Germ tokens a little bit, but basically, it's an equipment where when it comes into play, you create a Germ token and attach that equipment to it. All the power and toughness of a Living Weapon, basically, creature, comes from the Living Weapon itself. So the Germ is 0/0. If it doesn't have the equipment on it, it dies. If you don't have any other bonuses, it dies. But I put Bone Horde into play, you basically get a 0/0 Germ that's attached to it. And equipped creature gets X+X, where X number of creature cards in all graveyards. If you got some creature cards in graveyard, create a Bone Horde. It is just an XX creature, basically. And the Germ's 0. Granted, you could change this equipment to another creature and just let the Germ die, but the other thing is, and this is the only card that I found that had it, we have a new term here. Poison. Players poison if they have any poison counters. And Septic Rats mentions this. So this is a new rules term referring to someone that has poison counters. It's a 2/2 infect, and basically, if it attacks, defending player is poisoned, it gets bigger. There were 3 cycles to talk about in this one. The Zeniths. These were rare spells with X in their casting costs that were matching the colored Sons of Mirrodin that shuffled themselves back into the library. In this way, they match the beacons from 5th Dawn and a lot of stuff. I'll talk about it a little bit here, but it also kind of matches another cycle in Phyrexia All Will Be One. So they're kind of like a gap between the beacons to Phyrexian ones of these 3 kind of things. They're from a mega cycle that's really kind of interesting. And the art of each card features corresponding artifact land from Mirrodin. So, yeah. White Sun Zenith here creates X tap tokens. I'll talk about some of the other Zeniths. I talked about Black Sun Zenith, but I'll talk about the rest of them. The other cycle was, of course, color-aligned artifact creatures. These were commons that basically were connected to each color. Tangle Hulk here regenerates. It's connected to green. But, yeah. They're common artifacts that have activated abilities that cost colored mana. The other cycle, which I'm not showing off here, I showed off earlier, is the basic lands, 2 of each color, which is kind of interesting to be in a drop. If a small set has lands, it normally would have the 4. This has 2 lands of each. And the flavor of the corruption that we talked about. So the Mega Cycle. Let's talk about that for a second here. Because this is an interesting one here, and I'm showing off the cycle of black cards here. This is the Beacon of Unrest from 5th Dawn, which basically allows you to get a creature or artifact card back from the graveyard, shuffled it in. The Black Sun Zenith, which, of course, hey, deals -1/-1 counters, and then shuffles it back in. And then, of course, the Phyrexia all will be one version of things here, which, in this case, it's another X spell, but doesn't shuffle. So that's where the interesting things come in here. We went from, it's a spell that shuffles, an X spell that shuffles, and then it is a, just an X spell. This is target, one target creature gets -X until end of turn. If it's 5 or more, return a creature card value card of mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So it's an interesting evolution of the 3 colors there. With Black Sun Zenith being in the middle of this cycle, and this cycle exists for all of the colors. So just keep that in mind. From blue, black, green, white, red, all have a cycle like this through these that are connected together. The mirror pair, there were 4 in this set. We can start with the 2 heroes, mythic rare human knights that cost 2 and 2 color, have battle cry, and ability that triggers. The hero Bladehold I mentioned earlier, the one that has battle cry, it creates soldier tokens, tapped and attacking. When it attacks, hey, they're getting that battle cry bonus. And of course the hero Oxidridge, who has battle cry also and haste. When it attacks, creatures of power 1 or less can't block this turn. So yes, these 2 heroes are a pair. We have the Crusaders. Talk about the Mirrodin Crusader. Basically, these are rare knights that have 1 and 2 of the color that they match, and a protection from primary colors of the opposing faction, and some kind of either first strike or a variant. The white one has double strike, and is protection from black and green. The the mirrored one, the Phyrexian Crusader, has first strike, protection from red or white, and infect. So, yeah. So one has double strike, the other is first strike and infect. There were couriers that were mirrored. Cost Courier and Glissa's Courier. Common creatures that cost 1 and 2 of the color that they're in. They're 2/3s that basically have opposing land wall. Forest Walk and Mountain Walk. Pretty simple there, but they match, you know. The Koth one opposing the Glissa's one. Fighting against each other. And then, of course, the ones that were... Hey, remember I said there were some previewed cards. The Crusaders were previewed. These are the Striders that were also previewed in the game deck. They're given away action. So they're uncommon artifact cards that cost 4. They're 3/3s and enter the battlefield deal a blue. Peace Strider gives you life. The Pierce Strider deals damage, or has the opponent lose life. There were some reprinted cards we can talk about. There, of course, Divine Offer, originally printed in Legends, eventually last seen in 5th edition, so it's been a little while. Destroy an artifact, you gain life equal to the converted mana cost. Leonin Skyhunter was actually an uncommon in Mirrodin that was eventually seen in 9th edition, and is now a common. So it's a reprint, but it's also now at common level, 2/2 flying for 2 mana. And then, of course, Phyrexian Rager, which originally came out in Apocalypse. So this is a card from Apocalypse, back in some original Phyrexian stuff, showing up again here. They love those print blueprints of the past, so to say. Enters the battlefield, draw a card, and use 1 life. So, you get something there. There was a functional reprint. The Ogre Resistor, a functional reprint for a Lowland Giant, also Scattersaw Giant from Zendikar, but I only want to show 3. It's basically a 4/3. It costs 4 mana for a 4/3. So, yeah. A very simple switch over there. Alright. Let us talk about some notable cards in this set. And let's, of course, start with the 2 multicolored cards. So, yeah. Everything is either artifact or monocolored, except for 2 cards. This one here, one of the planeswalkers in the set, Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas, who basically looks at the top 5 cards of your library, reveal an artifact from among them, put it in your hand, for the rest of the bottom of your library. For tick down, artifact becomes a 5/5 artifact creature permanently. And for down 4, target player loses X life, you gain X life, where X is twice the number of artifacts you control. The tick down isn't particularly super big, but those abilities aren't bad for an artifact deck. He was there. And the other one, and these 2 form the colors that are, of course, Phyrexian's main colors, because it was really blue, black, green in Scars. So they do reflect that. Tezzeret here, the Agent of Bolas, who's helping out the Phyrexians, being blue-black. And, of course, the other one, Galissa the Traitor, who I mentioned, our Death Touch, you get stuff creatures that First Strike Death Touch. Her being black-green. So yeah, we're getting Galissa as the other one here, which I talked a little bit about earlier. Consecrated Sphinx. So yeah, it's a big creature that gives a really big advantage. Yeah. It's a flying 4/6 that whenever an opponent draws a card, you draw 2. Pretty good. Of course, we had Go for the Throat. Basically, it's a little different than Doomblade. Basically, we had Terror, which was destroy target non-black, non-artifact. And then you had Doomblade, which was destroy target non-black. And now you have Go for the Throat, which is destroy target non-artifact creature. So, Go for the Throat isn't necessarily great in the Scars of Mirrodin Block or any Mirrodin Block. But outside of that, it's a 2-mana destroy a creature, just can't target an artifact creature. You know, it has a lot of applications after this because of this. And it's technically a mirrored pair of Crush, to destroy target non-creature artifact. Inkmoth Nexus. Basically, as soon as this came out, this became the backbone of many poison-based strategies. If it's a poison deck, you can have Inkmoth Nexus. It's easy to get out, easy to pump it up, you know, and anti-land removal is hard. As long as it's not a creature, you can have this out on turn 2, starting to give people poison counters. So, yeah. The Sword of Feast and Famine. We got another sword! We're continuing our sword mega cycle. It's a big piece of equipment. You know, it's had some places, you know, here and there, but it's another sword. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, has protection from black and green, and whenever a creature deals combat damage to the player, that player discards a card, and you untap all lands you control. Pretty good. Pretty good, I'd say. Now, a favorite of mine that I like comboing in a deck in my block decks is Ichor Wellspring. Granted, it's not a super great deck card, but basically, when it comes into play, or is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card. I created a deck where I put that out, sacrifice it to do something, and then have ways of getting it back. So, it's card advantage. It's pretty good in Pauper in a lot of ways, and can be sacrificed for additional value. So, that was the big thing about it. It's a pretty good artifact for Pauper. I used it in a block deck for that, so I kind of figured it. Blightsteel Colossus, we mentioned him earlier. He's basically just an upgraded version of Darksteel Colossus. He's a trample, infect, indestructible, and if he put into the graveyard from anywhere, reveal it and shuffle it into its owner's library. So yeah, Darksteel Colossus, who we had before, was a trample, indestructible. If it be put into the graveyard, 11/11, shuffled anywhere. Basically, it just got corrupted and now has infect also. Yeah. It can win a game with a single attack. So if there's places in Legacy and Vintage where it can be cheated in, yeah, they're big infected. We've talked about it a few times here at Bladehold. Basically had some pretty big places for it, especially decks that could create a lot of tokens and stuff. It created tokens on its own. Signal Pest. Basically, it was a 1-mana and had battle card. It had a lot of modern decks play around it, with flooding with a lot of small creatures. And this was a great way of boosting the small creatures. It's battle cry. If it attacks, each other creature gets +1/+0. Multiple creatures with battle cry, it builds up that number. Phyrexian Crusader has had a lot of success in it, Infect and Yawgmoth decks in Modern. It has a lot of removal it dodges, because it has protection from red and white. So, yeah. And it often shows up in a lot of sideboards because of that. Treasure Mage has a reference to Trinket Mage. It's basically the opposite of Trinket Mage. There are other ones here that would continue the references with a Trophy Mage and Tribute Mage. Basically, yeah. Trinket Mage was a search for a small cost thing. Treasure Mage is search for a big one. Hey, Thrun the Last Troll is basically a legendary version of Troll Ascetic. We referred to Troll Ascetic with Asceticism last set. Thrun is basically the next step in that line. Can't be countered, can't be the target spells or ability opponent controls, it's got hexproof, and regenerates. So Troll Ascetic became Asceticism, became Thrun. Good old Thrun. He is the last troll. There were some bans and restrictions that occurred during this set and beyond. Green Sun Zenith. We've talked about a couple of the Zeniths so far. Green Sun's a fun one to talk about. Yeah. Search your library for a green creature card with a mana value of X or less, put it in the battlefield, and shuffle Green Sun Zenith into your library. Basically, it's a really good creature tutor. It's a big thing for if you need a toolbox and you need specific cards. It's a great one. It was banned early in Modern's existence because it was able to get things like Dryad Arbiter for 1 mana. Dryad Arbiter is a land that's also a creature. So, Dryad Arbor. So yeah, it costs 0 to play. But in December of last year, Green Sun Zenith was unbanned. Because basically, a lot of other things have had effects like this. So, yeah. This was banned in Modern for quite a while. It's back now, but it has a history there. Phyrexian Revoker. It's a creature version of Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle, you choose a card name, and the activate abilities of source of the chosen card name can't activate the mana failure. Phyrexian Revoker is the same thing. You choose a non-land card name, and its activated abilities can't be done. It's had a lot of play in Vintage format to prevent people from using powerful artifacts. It was banned in Historic Brawl, basically because it could shut off Planeswalkers, opponent's Planeswalker commanders. So there was a, don't do this kind of place for it, eventually. Let's talk about some other cards that were in the set. Blue Sun Zenith. Hey, it's the blue one. Draw X cards, shuffle in your library. Creeping Corrosion. Destroy all artifacts for 4 mana. It's artifact block. This is pretty good and shows up there. Darksteel Plate. It's indestructible, and for 2, equipped creature is indestructible. A little bit way of getting some good indestructibleness there. Fangren Marauder. If an artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you gain 5 life. Comboing this with artifact sacrifice and, things like that, you get a lot of life. Also creating token artifacts and sacrificing them, just gets a lot of life very quickly. Frantic Salvage. This is the one I used with the Ichor Wellspring. Put a number of target artifact cards from your graveyard on top of your library, draw a card. Hey, I bring back all my Ichor Wellsprings. I draw one of them. I play it, I draw another one. I play it, I draw another one. I play it, I draw another one. I got through all the ones I had. Oh, hey, now I sacrifice all of them. Draw 3 additional cards, gain 3 additional effects. Frantic Salvage. Again, these are combos that I built within the block, but I like these cards. Hellkite Igniter. A flying haste that gets plus X plus O or X number of artifacts you control. So if you have a lot of artifacts, it gets big. 5-10 artifacts, it gets plus 10 plus O for 2 mana for 1 in a red. You can pay it multiple times. Massacre Worm! Massacre Worm. A 6/5, when it enters the battlefield, creatures your opponent controls get -2/-2 until end of turn. It nukes your opponent's creatures, and whenever a creature an opponent controls put in the graveyard from the battlefield, that player loses 2 life. This is very anti-token creatures or swarm creatures. You just nuke them and nuke your opponent. Or if your opponent just has some small creatures, you Massacre Worm them. Ugh. Shuts kiss. Olirant's Keepers that can't have counters placed on it. Basically a little sending of some things that are anti-infect in a lot of ways. These guys here can't be affected by infect. They can't have counters placed on them. Mirror works. Whenever a non-token artifact enters the battlefield under control, you can make 2, and if you do, put a tokenless copy of that artifact in the battlefield. Basically, you can copy every artifact you play, and it's just non-token artifact. Meaning, artifact creatures you can copy this way. Mirror work can have some pretty big power. Mirror Turbine, which taps put mirror artifact creatures into play, and tap 5 mirrors and it to search your library for a mirror card put in the battlefield. If you're doing Tribal Mirror, this is a pretty good card for that. It creates mirror tokens and searches for mirror tokens, and puts them into the battlefield. Phyrexian. It gives a creature infect. I mean, you can just combo on something that does horrible things, or slips by opponent's defenses, or something like that, and hey, now it infects. Phyrexian Rebirth, which destroys all creature and puts an XX horror artifact creature token in play. Maybe one of those tokens we talked about earlier. That's the number of creatures you destroy. So you destroy everything and get 1 big creature. The Plague Maul Meese, where you sacrifice a creature to proliferate. Hey, we got proliferation here, and we got creature sacrifice. Man, that's some good ways of dealing with a lot of stuff and playing around here. Praetor's Council from Mythics. Return all cards from your graveyard to your hand. exile this, you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So basically, if you would have perhaps, wiped the board of creatures, played a lot of things, you cast this, exile it, and it got no maximum hand size, and get all your cards back. A little combo there for some things. Sangromancer, where a creature an opponent controls is put in the graveyard for the battlefield, you gain 3 life. When an opponent discards a card, you also may gain 3 life. So you just keep feeding off an opponent. Shimmermere, cast artifact cards so they have flash. It gives artifacts flash and has flash. Simple as that. You can play them at any time as an instance. The Spine of Ish Shop. This is another one that I used with the Ichor Wellspring. When there's the battlefield, destroy a permanent, and it's returned, put in the graveyard, return to your hand. So this is one of those ones that you play, destroy permanent, and then sacrifice it to something to get it back in your hand to then replay. It's expensive, but then you can start nuking permanents, not just creatures. Artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, lands. Has some use. Titan Forge, where you put charge counters on it and move them to create a big golem, 9/9 golem, kind of neat that way. Vidalcan Animist, who you can tap some mana to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, and then tap or untap it. You can use it to untap one of your own creatures by shrinking it, or to shrink an opponent's creature and tap it, and then use something like Proliferate to start murdering it. You put a -1/-1 counter on it. The point of proliferation sometimes is to put counters on stuff, so you can proliferate. It doesn't just have to be infect. It often is. And then Vidalcan Infuser, at the beginning of upkeep, you make a charge counter on target artifact. This can be a pretty good one for an artifact deck, because then you're just adding tokens on here and building things up that way. Alright, let's talk about the intro decks and the event decks. So, of course, we'll start here with Battle Cries. It was a red-white Mirrodin deck, okay, where we had Battle Cry and Metalcraft as big focus on this here. So, it's basically calling together your red-white things into some kind of, ragtime group using tokens and kind of swarming at your opponent there. The rares here, of course, were Victory's Herald and White Sun Zenith. I've talked about White Sun Zenith before. Victory's Herald, on the other hand, when it attacks, attacking creatures gain flying and lifelink until end of turn. That could be pretty good. You attack with that. In a Battlecry deck, your Battlecry stuff now also have flying and lifelink. So yeah, it had 2 1/4 paladins. They only had a half paladin in this deck, but it was basically Battlecry, Artifact, Metalcraft deck. It would be pretty good. Where they did things with Mirrorsmith to create tokens and artifact creatures and stuff like that. They had signal pests in here too. Battle Cries was an interesting one back. We had Inevitable Doom, our first of Phyrexian alignment. A blue-black deck that focused on Proliferate and Living Weapons. So, yep. It is a lot of Inevitable Doom, a lot of ways, putting out -1/-1 counters, Contagion Class, Trigon of Corruption, which were both from the previous set. Kind of building up things. The rares here were Psychosis Crawler, which is power and toughness equal number of cards in your hand, and when you draw a card, each opponent loses a life. In a big card draw deck, you nuke your opponents. And then, of course, the Bone Horde, which I talked about, where things in graveyards give your living weapon a big boost. So there's a bunch of artifacts here, more living weapons. It is a very, again, Proliferate, living weapon kind of contained thing, with some spells that kind of deal around that. So just keep those in mind when you're using Doom and Inevitable. Mirrormancy. It's a red-blue deck that focuses on burn, basically. Direct damage. It's a mirror-aligned deck. So what better way to get rid of your enemies than to nuke them from orbit, basically, rather than touch them if they're going to try to affect you. It does have things like Lava Axe, some things that take bites out of your opponent's creatures, Quicksilver Geyser, Sleep to tap them down to give you some time, some things that actually can do some damage. The 2 rares here, of course, are Galvanoth, which is during the beginning of your upkeep, and you look at the top card of your library. If it's an instant or sorcery, you can cast it without paying its mana cost. So, in a instant or sorcery heavy deck, it has 19 of both of them combined. Getting a Galvanoth into play is good, where you can kind of peek at it and be like, oh, this is instant sorcery. I'm paying without paying its mana cost. I can throw it out there. On the other hand, Red Sun Zenith, that's one you probably don't want to Galvanoff. You don't have to play it. So Red Sun Zenith you keep because it's basically an X burn spell that would, if it puts something in the graveyard, exile instead. So it is the basically disintegrate ability, but shuffles into your library. So, yep. The burn and shut down thing. Again, that's why you get something like Sleep to shut down the opponent. And the final of the intro decks was a green-white deck that centered around Effect. Interestingly enough, green-white in the Phyrexian line. Where green-black was kind of the big Infect previous one. You had some blue. But in this time, it's green-black. That's very interesting. Got some Blight Mamas, Plague Beers, Priests of Norm, things like that. But the two rares here were Phyrexian Hydra and Decimator Web. Phyrexian Hydra, it's okay. It's an Infect creature, 7/7 for 5 mana. If it's dealt damage, prevent that damage, and put a -1/-1 counter on it for each damage prevented. So it shrinks. It basically infects itself, too, while it's infecting. I mean, if you can bring it back from the graveyard, I don't see it as being too terrible. It's 5 mana, 7/7. Decimator Web, on the other hand, I kind of like it, even though it's just kind of like a kick to the crotch for whoever you're doing it is. Target opponent loses 2 life, gets a poison counter, and puts the top 6 cards of his or her library in his or her graveyard. Decimator Web is just, I'm being a jerk. I find it kind of hilarious. But it does kind of fit with the entire effect. Motif. Let's talk about the 2 events. And of course we can start with the red one, Into the Breach. Remember, these are Mirrodin and Phyrexian also. This is meant to be a fast Battlecry deck. Hey, Battlecry deck. It's got a lot of things. It's got like Ornithopter, Memnite, Signal Pest, Goblin War Driver, some summons to get out some tokens to kind of work with this. The thing about the event decks is they are a lot less connected to just these. They are much more standard at the time. So you get a lot of cards that are in standard there. Why? What I mean is, there are, in each of these event decks, 7 rares. Okay? Some of them are no mythic rares, and it's a 60-card deck and a 15-card sideboard. I'm not going to go into depths of the full deck and the sideboard, but, I'll talk about the rares that are in this deck, and how many of them are in a deck. So this is a deck that has multiple rares. There are only 5 different rares, so there's multiples of some of these. Of course, we've got Goblin Guide, which are 2 of them. Whenever it attacks and defender player removes the top card of their library, if it's a land card, whenever it attacks, defending player removes the top card of their library. If it's a land card, that player puts it into their hand. So 1/2/2 haste that gives opponents some cards. Contested War Zone, there was 1 of. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, that creature's controller gains control of contested war zones, and it basically battle cries your creatures also. Leyline of Punishment, which again, that's another one that there was only 1 of. So we have 2 Goblin Guides, Contested War Zone, Leyline of Punishment. It's a leyline. It's in your opening hand. You put in play. Players can't gain life. Damage can't be prevented. Spikeshot Elder, another 1 of. That was one we talked about in Scars of Mirrodin, where it deals damage to power target creature or player. Hey, that's not a tap ability. It's 1/2 red. Attack and battle cry a bunch of time, and then you can start, before blockers are assigned, do a bunch of damage with Spikeshot Elder. And then, of course, Devastating Summons, which there were 2 of. So we had 2, 1, 1, 1, 2 as our rare numbers. In additional casting it, sacrifice X lands and put 2 XX elementals tokens into play, where X is the number of lands. So we have some Zendikar block stuff, some M11 stuff, and of course, some Mirrodin block stuff to build a deck. So it is a standard deck in a lot of ways, and meant to be a quick, throw a lot of hasty creatures out that attack you fast, swarm you. It's a speed deck. It is a, aggro deck. Meant to be fast. And the other event deck, then, is Infect and Defile. This one is a blue-black deck, and it's meant to be a mid-range aggro control deck. So, a little bit of a different type of deck here. So these 2 decks don't necessarily match against each other. They could. This is all about being patient, this one here. It's meant to be a little less aggressive. Not to, if you're just attacking with creatures, you can find yourself outmatched. Basically, it's made to have some long-term plans, draw more cards, have more creatures, cast more spells. and control your opponent's life total. So Infect is a big thing too in this deck. To talk about it, we have to talk about its rares, of which there were only 4 types of rares in this one. So we had 2 Drowned Catacombs. Hey, from M11, the tap for comes into play tap, and tap unless you control a island or swamp, taps for a blue or a black. 2 pretty good lands there in that way. We, of course, had one of the Hand of the Praetors, which I talked about in the previous block which it was in. We had 2 Consuming Vapors, which target player sacrifices a creature, gain life equal to sacrifice a creature, gain life equal to its toughness. It has rebound. Again, a new older one. And then Phyrexian Vat Mother, which was our basically one from this block, or from this set, Mirrodin Besieged, which was an effect at the beginning of your upkeep. You get a poison counter for a 4-mana 4/5. So it's sort of like you give yourself poison counters, but you get a big kind of stompy creature that you can get out for a little cheaper. Kind of a sacrificing something there. Again, it's all about that control. You're putting out the Vat, one of your 2 Vat Mothers. So 2 Vat Mothers, so 2/1, 2/2 was the rares here. Again, the Vat Mothers are something I feel like I can probably replace, put more Hands of the Praetors in. There's some other rares that I feel like better. The Vat Mothers aren't necessarily bad. But, like, these event decks are a pretty good basis for some types of deck, and certainly could use some work, especially from Standard at the time. You could build an interesting Standard deck out of it. They're a very good starting location for some things. But I definitely could see some places where these could have some stuff pulled out of it. But there you go. There's Mirrodin Besieged. I hope you enjoyed learning about it. This is one that I, again, did the pre-release for. This was when I came back into Magic in full swing. I kind of was dipping my toe back into Magic, but for Scars and Mirrodin Besieged and New Phyrexia, I really dived back into it. And yeah, my Infect deck is the one that kind of came out of this, but I did other decks and stuff too. I did an Artifacts Sacrifice deck where I was using the Sash of Ith and the Ichor Wellsprings to gain cards and get extra mana, and then sacrifice destroy permanents. I did a bunch of, I had a Battlecry deck too. I think I have like 4 decks out of the block that I created that I still have to today, which are not great decks, but they're really cool from the block. I enjoyed this block. It was my kind of reintroduction back into Magic, and I've been having a lot of fun revisiting and talking about it. I like talking about all the Magic cards and the history of them and these different sets, but these ones have been a little bit more nostalgic for me because it's that, okay, this is when I got back into Magic again, really hard, this is when I really dived back in and started looking at stuff and playing a little bit. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this viewing to it, learned some cards, and maybe there's some cards that you want to play. Hey, Green Sun Zenith, still not bad. There's other stuff that's probably better in it now, but not bad. Other cards here that I've showed off still have some places. I mean, Lightstone Colossus, kind of still mean. The swords have always been kind of mean. There's a lot of stuff which is pretty good still to this day. So keep that in mind. And then we'll leave it there. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to see more content like this, where I do some more things on the history of Magic Gathering, some other Magic topics and stuff, or other tabletop-related topics, check me out. I do a lot of stuff that's live on Twitch. Everything goes up on YouTube, though. If you want to see what's going on the YouTube side, just go check that out. Like, subscribing, the bell over there. That's always a helpful thing. Let me know your experience from Mirrodin Besieged. Do you have any? Would you be interested in getting cards from this set? Just let me know. I hope I showed off some of the cards that you might be interested in if you have not played. Over on the Twitch side, hey, you want to check me out live? We're on record videos, do live plays of TTRPGs. I'm discussing tabletop Saturdays at 6, where we talk about tabletop news and deeper discussion topics. And of course, I do some gaming over there too if you just want to hang out and chat a little bit. So, some variety gaming too. All my schedules are on my social medias. That's my Discord, Blue Sky, X/Twitter. That's kind of my order of importance for when I put stuff up on those. Just kind of gives you an idea of what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and maybe some topic information. Alright, I'm going to keep going. Thank you all for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed diving into Magic History again, and we'll talk more Magic History or tabletop. But until the next time, we dive through those plains and voids. I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful farewell.